Hello, 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 everybody. Welcome to another amazing, wonderful, fantastic webinar. Remember, if you're here live or on recording, please do hit that like button, hit subscribe. It really does help us out over at the Pass Buddy team. And also remember, if you haven't joined our community yet, head on over to passbuddy.com. That's where I have all my practice test tips, tricks to help you pass your exam. That being said, let's jump into some finance questions, shall we? This is a section that a lot of students always struggle with. And remember, if you're here with us live, feel free to ask any questions that you might have about getting your license or about starting up in the industry. So, why not jump right into questions, shall we? So, the first one says, which of the following is not true with regards to land contracts? So, remember, we're going to be looking for a false statement, right? We're not looking for something that is true. So there's going to be three things that are going to be accurate about land contracts, and then one thing that's going to be an outlier that's going to be like, oh, that is not accurate about land contracts. That's the answer that we're looking for. So, first one is it's used in connection with seller financing. It is known as an installment sales contract. It requires the seller to transfer title at closing, or it's referred to as a contract for deed. So there's a couple in here that aren't 100% true that stick out, right? So a land contract does have several names. Several names that we might refer to it as are going to be an installment sales contract, okay, or a contract for deed. So those two are out. Okay. So now it's used in connection with seller financing. That's one statement. Or it requires the seller to transfer title at closing. So which one is false? So when we're talking about a land contract or a land sale contract or a contract for deed or an installment sales contract, the seller is allowing the purchaser to finance the property. The seller would be the vendor, the purchaser would be the vendee. And in this situation, the seller retains legal title to the property and the buyer is going to get equitable title. So, does it require that the seller transfer title at closing? Nay, nay, it does not require that. So, if that was what you chose, 100% that is absolutely accurate. It does not require the seller to transfer title at closing. So, the statement that it does is false. It is not true. So let's keep it moving. Let's keep it grooving, shall we? Let's go on to the next question. This says a closing disclosure is provided to the borrower at least blank business days before closing. Is that three, two, five, or one? So this is a TRID regulation, and whenever I talk about that, a TILA RESPA integrated disclosure regulation. Okay. What happens is this: we have to realize that one of the ways that I remember this is TRID is tri, like a triangle or a tricycle. So three. So this is a TRID regulation. It requires 3 business days to have that closing disclosure in hand. And so let me ask this question for those of you who are here with me live. Um, why do they require that closing disclosure to be given prior to the closing? Why do they require it to be given prior to the closing? Does anyone have an idea on that? There's actually a couple of reasons why. Number one, the first and foremost, actually, is to check for clerical errors. I would refer to them as. Yeah, when someone does the math wrong, someone adds a zero, moves the decimal point to the wrong place, has a comma in the wrong spot. We are human. We are punching numbers into a computer. It does happen. So what happens is it gives an opportunity for everyone to kind of give a once over. And as a real estate broker, I take a look at that for my clients. Okay. I look at it because guess what? Not necessarily because I am the expert, but because it's built in so that people could look at it and just check to make sure that there's no addition or subtraction errors, because that does happen. I've caught, now I'm not going to tell you that there's there's been hundreds of closings that I've done in my career where I've caught errors. No, but there have been a handful. I'd say at least once a year there would be a situation where I would catch an error or something like that. And that saves some anxiety, some stress. And also, too, when you do give it a once over and you are the one to catch the error, you do look like the hero there. So that's also something that I like to point out to my real estate professionals as you're getting into the industry. Take care in going over that closing disclosure for your clients. And if you miss something, it's okay. But because like I said, there is some things that it's the human aspect of this. That's why they give it to you several days before, 3 business days before they're required. So let's take a look at this one. All the following documents indicate a loan is paid off except mortgage default, mortgage discharge, mortgage satisfaction, or mortgage release. So what say you? What say you in the chat? Okay, for those of you who are here with me live. So is it going to be a default, a discharge, a satisfaction, or a release? So what happens is when a mortgage is paid off, okay, and that loan no longer it has a balance to it, right? It's a situation where you have to get some sort of documentation that there's been a satisfaction, a discharge, or a release. But a default is actually going to mean that you have violated one of the conditions of that loan, of that mortgage. So a default means that you have done something where you are in default of that loan. So now a lot of people always think that default means that you have not paid. And it could mean that, right? It could mean, hey, you haven't paid me. Correct. That is 100% accurate. But it can also mean you've done something that is in violation of the mortgage. So, Stu, what would be an example of that? Well, what happens is you're actually technically not supposed to make major renovations to the property without notifying the lender. Now, here's the thing, there's a couple reasons for that, okay? So, why do most people probably don't do that? Is because they're usually adding value of some sort. They're usually saying, hey, I'm going to be upgrading the kitchen. I'm going to be doing things like this. Now, all those alterations add value to the asset. And you have to understand the home is an asset of the lender. As soon as they put a mortgage on that property, they receive a mortgage, right? And they have a mortgage lien on that property is an asset of the lender. So what happens is they gave the loan out based on the value of that asset. Now, that being said, if you devalue the asset, that's a concern because then that changes things. So, like, if there was a deck and you said, you know what, I don't like this deck on my in my backyard. I want there to be no deck and I want it just to be a dirt pile. That could potentially devalue the property, devalue the asset. And if you did something like that without notifying the lender, you could also be in default. You could be making payments right on time, but you remove that deck and you just leave a dirt pile there and you're making payments on time, you could still technically be in default because you have devalued me. You've made a major alteration to the asset without notifying the lender. Right? So that's something to keep in mind when you do get into home ownership, okay? You don't want to do that. But again, like I said, typically, generally speaking, people don't do things like that. Okay. So, for a purpose of loan estimate under Regulation Z, someone who shows interest in a loan is treated as a borrower, cannot be given any disclosures unless they apply in person, is not given a loan estimate until receiving approval, or is referred by the mortgage company to a lender to initiate a lending process. What say you? What say you in the chat? Okay. What say you in the chat? So, this is a situation where Regulation Z is also known as the Truth in Lending. Okay, Truth in Lending, or TILA, right? Truth in Lending Act. So, the situation is going to be this. Okay. Truth in Lending or Regulation Z, they're going to be treated as a borrower. So if someone shows interest, they have to be disclosed certain information about the loan. Okay, so and I always say this truth in lending actually applies to consumer financing. So I'll tell you where you actually probably see truth in lending the most. Okay, and I always tell my students whenever we're talking about financing, I want you to think of a car commercial, okay? I want you to think of a car commercial, and the main thing to think about when you're watching the car commercial is this: is the end of the car commercial. So what happens is, and I can tell you almost every car commercial known to man. What happens is the car pulls up, you see the side view of the car, and they say a bunch of tiny print at the bottom, and then someone talks really fast, and they say 0.9% APR financing for qualified buyers who want to, and all that kind of stuff. That is truth in lending. They have to be truthful and honest and disclose all the things you need to qualify. So all the things are actually at the bottom, that says to qualified borrowers, and all the terms are there as far as the financing that they're offering in that advertisement. That is Regulation Z. That is truth in lending right there in your face, real life examples. So let's get one or two more in and then we'll wrap up for today. Remember, don't forget, go on over to passbuddy.com. That's where we have all practice questions like this to help you pass your real estate exam. Next question is, which of the following is applicable to an adjustable rate mortgage? Payments can be adjusted according to the borrower's budget. Interest rates start higher than market average but is scheduled to drop at certain intervals. Interest rates and payments fluctuate based on a pre-stated reference rate or index, or the interest rates can fluctuate and have no limits going up or down. So they're saying, hey, there's no limit up or down. Do you think that's it? Or you think it's going to be that they adjust based on the borrower's budget? Like, hey, something happens to you, something comes up, oh, it's gonna adjust to whatever you're currently making, whatever this case may be. That would be nice, right? So, or they fluctuate based on a pre-stated reference rate or index. Yeah, so they base it off of certain market indexes. So what happens is it's basically the type of loan where you're making a gamble and saying, "Hey, I as the borrower am willing to take on some risk," stating that, "Hey, the interest rate will likely go down." Okay, because that's usually what the borrower is going to be. They're not going to gamble on the interest rate going up, right? So they gamble on it going down as far as an adjustable rate mortgage is concerned. Or they usually get that knowing that they're only going to be in the property for a short period of time or a window of time where whenever it's going to adjust, they're likely not going to be in that property or own it any longer. So that being said, remember, head on over to passbuddy.com. Also, follow us, like us, follow us on TikTok. We post TikToks every single day. I think one's going up right after we go offline here. And everyone, I want to tell you have a great, wonderful, fantastic rest of your day, and I will see you all real soon.